I've been a trucker for nearly 20 years, seen just about everything you can imagine on the road. Drunks, crazies, even a few things I wish I could forget. But nothing prepared me for that night on a lonely stretch of highway in New Mexico. The night I picked up a hitchhiker who wasn't quite right. It was past midnight, the kind of late where even the stars seem tired, hanging dimly in the vast New Mexico sky. My rig rumbled along the empty road, headlights cutting through the darkness. I was just trying to keep my eyes open, cursing myself for skipping that last truck stop coffee, when I saw him. He was standing on the shoulder, thumb out, looking desperate, like a ghost materializing from the blackness. For a moment, I debated driving past. I know better than to pick up hitchhikers, especially out here, especially this late. But something in his posture, the way his shoulders slumped as if he'd given up on everything, tugged at me. Against my better judgment, I muttered, easing the rig to a stop. The air brakes hissed, loud in the night. I leaned over and pushed the passenger door open. The man climbed in without a word, just nodded in thanks, his face hidden beneath the shadow of a hood. He smelled faintly of earth, like he'd been walking a long time. His clothes were dark, almost blending into the night, and he carried nothing with him. He didn't even bother to buckle the seatbelt, just sat there, hands on his knees, staring straight ahead. I cleared my throat. "Where you headed?" "Just down the road," he said, voice low, almost drowned out by the hum of the engine. It was the kind of voice that makes your skin crawl, not because it was threatening, but because it was devoid of anything human, no emotion, no warmth, just emptiness. I shrugged it off, figuring he was just another lost soul. The road does that to people, wears them down until there's nothing left but the shell. But as we drove on, the air in the cab grew heavy, oppressive. It was like the atmosphere had thickened, pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. I tried to ignore it, focusing on the road ahead, but the feeling wouldn't go away. I glanced at the guy out of the corner of my eye, and that's when I saw it. His reflection in the side mirror, his face wasn't right. It was too elongated, like someone had stretched it out, and his eyes. Jesus, his eyes were too big, bulging like they were about to pop out of his skull. His mouth was pulled back in a twisted grin, but there was nothing joyful about it. It was the kind of smile that says you're about to do something terrible. I jerked my head to look at him directly, heart pounding, but when I did, he looked normal again. Just a tired guy in a hoodie, staring blankly at the road ahead. But in the mirror, it was all wrong. I gripped the wheel tighter, knuckles white. My pulse thundered in my ears, drowning out the rumble of the engine. Something wasn't right. I knew it, felt it deep in my gut, and every instinct I had screamed to get this guy out of my truck. The radio crackled to life, startling me so bad I nearly veered off the road. Static hissed from the speakers, and then, through the noise, I heard it. A voice, faint, almost unintelligible, but clear enough to make the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. "He's not human." I turned to the man beside me, but his eyes were already on me, locked onto mine through the reflection in the mirror. His face, God, it was worse now, his smile stretched wider, impossibly wide, the corners of his mouth nearly touching his ears. His eyes, those bulging, unnatural eyes, stared at me, unblinking. Panic surged through me, hot and fierce. I swerved the truck to the side of the road, tires screeching as I brought the rig to a jarring halt. Without thinking, I threw open the passenger door, my voice trembling as I shouted, "Get out!" The man didn't argue. He climbed out slowly, calmly, as if this was all part of some sick game. But before he closed the door, he leaned in close, so close I could feel his breath on my skin, cold as death. "You'll see me again," he whispered, his voice dripping with certainty. Then he was gone, disappearing into the night as if he'd never been there at all. I slammed the door shut and floored the gas, my hands shaking on the wheel. I drove for hours, not stopping until I saw the first light of dawn breaking over the horizon. But even then, the fear clung to me, a shadow that wouldn't let go. For days after, I couldn't shake the image of his twisted reflection. I saw it in every mirror, in every reflective surface, that grotesque smile haunting me at every turn. I knew I'd never be able to forget it. But the worst part? I knew he was right. One night, maybe tomorrow, maybe years from now, I'd see him again. And when I do, I don't think I'll be able to drive away. I've been hauling freight up and down the highways for almost 15 years now, and if there's one thing I've learned, it's that the road has a way of throwing surprises at you when you least expect them. Most of the time, it's just the usual, bad weather, lousy drivers, or the endless stretches of nothingness that make you question why you chose this life in the first place. But every once in a while, something happens that sticks with you, something that makes you rethink all those miles behind you. This story? Yeah, this is one of those. It was late, somewhere around 11 p.m., and I was pushing through the final leg of a long haul. I was heading down I-70, just outside of Kansas City, Missouri. My rig, a dependable old Peterbilt I affectionately called Betsy, was humming along, the road stretching out before me like a black ribbon under the faint glow of the moon. The air was crisp, one of those early fall nights where you can feel winter just starting to nibble at the edges. I was making good time, too, and was already picturing myself pulling into the next truck stop, grabbing a greasy burger, and then hitting the sleeper for a few hours of shut-eye. The road was mostly empty, just me and the occasional set of headlights in the rearview. It was peaceful in that way only truckers understand, just you, your thoughts, and the open road. I just passed a small sign for some no-name exit when I noticed something strange up ahead. At first, it was just a flicker of movement on the side of the road, barely visible in the glow of my headlights. As I got closer, I saw it was a car, a beat-up sedan pulled over on the shoulder, hazard lights blinking weakly in the dark. Now, let me tell you something about truckers. We're a suspicious bunch by nature, but we also know the code of the road. If you see someone broken down, you at least slow down to see if they need help. It's just what you do. Besides, I figured it was probably some poor sap who'd blown a tire or run out of gas. So, I started to ease off the throttle, bringing Betsy down from her steady cruise. As I got closer, I saw a figure standing beside the car, a guy, mid-30s maybe, waving his arms like a maniac, trying to flag me down. He looked desperate, which, given the situation, wasn't surprising. But there was something off about him, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. I pulled Betsy to a stop a few yards ahead of the car and flipped on my flashers. As I hopped down from the cab, the guy started jogging toward me, his face coming into clearer view under the glow of my headlights. He was tall, lanky, with greasy black hair that hung down into his eyes. His clothes were dirty, torn in places, and his eyes, they had that wild look, the kind you see in folks who've been through some serious shit. "Hey there," I called out, trying to keep my tone friendly but cautious. "You need a hand?" The guy skidded to a stop a few feet from me, breathing hard. "Thank God you stopped, man. I've been out here for hours. Car broke down, and I don't have a phone." Something about his story didn't sit right with me. There wasn't a drop of sweat on him despite his frantic waving, and the night wasn't cold enough to warrant that kind of heavy breathing. Still, I've always had a soft spot for folks in trouble, and maybe he really was just having a bad night. "What's wrong with your car?" I asked, glancing over his shoulder at the hunk of junk parked on the shoulder. "Engine just died on me," he said, but he was looking at me too closely, like he was sizing me up. I nodded slowly, feeling my hackles rise a little. "All right, let me grab my phone from the cab. I'll call a tow for you." I turned back toward Betsy, trying to keep my pace steady, not wanting to tip him off to the fact that I was getting a bad feeling about this whole situation. As I reached the cab and opened the door, I glanced into the side mirror out of habit, and what I saw nearly made my heart stop. There were two other guys creeping up behind me, one coming from the driver's side and the other from the front of the truck. Both looked just as rough as the first guy, and neither of them seemed like they were about to offer me a friendly handshake. "Shit," I muttered under my breath, trying to keep my cool. This was a setup, plain and simple. And here I was, about to be the main course. Without missing a beat, I reached into the cab, not for my phone, but for the tire iron I keep stashed under the seat. I grabbed it, feeling the cool metal in my hand, and turned around slowly. "Hey, buddy," I called out, forcing a grin. "Looks like you've got some friends out here. You guys planning a party?" The guy stopped dead in his tracks, his expression flickering with something between surprise and anger. The other two halted as well, like they hadn't expected me to notice them so soon. Just need some help," he stammered, but his eyes flicked to the tire iron, and I could see the wheels turning in his head. "Well, ain't that funny?" I said, still grinning, but I tightened my grip on the iron. "You know, where I come from, it's considered bad manners to sneak up on someone." The three of them exchanged glances, and I could see they were weighing their options. The guy closest to me took a step forward, but I didn't give him the chance to get any closer. "Tell you what," I said, my voice dropping to a low growl, "why don't you boys back off before I decide to introduce you to Betsy's little friend here?" I lifted the tire iron slightly, letting them see I wasn't bluffing. For a moment, it felt like the world had frozen, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Then, as if they'd silently agreed, the three of them started backing up, hands raised slightly in that universal gesture of, no harm, no foul. "All right, man, take it easy," the first guy said, his voice shaking a bit. "We're just messing with you." I didn't drop my guard. "Yeah, well, I'm not in the mood for jokes tonight. So why don't you get in your car and drive on out of here, before I get really pissed?" They didn't need to be told twice. The three of them hightailed it back to their junker, and within seconds, they were peeling off down the road, hazard lights still blinking in the dark. I stood there for a minute, watching them disappear into the distance, my heart still pounding in my chest. Once I was sure they were gone, I tossed the tire iron back into the cab and let out a long, shaky breath. "Holy hell, John," I muttered to myself, climbing back into Betsy's seat. "Next time, maybe just keep driving." As I settled back into the driver's seat and fired up the engine, a wave of exhaustion hit me, harder than before. But there was no way in hell I was stopping now, not until I was well away from that spot. I drove for another hour, maybe two, until I saw the familiar lights of a truck stop up ahead. Pulling in, I parked Betsy and just sat there for a moment, letting the adrenaline drain away. Inside the truck stop, I grabbed a cup of coffee, black and strong enough to strip paint, from the counter and slumped into a booth. As I took my first sip, I could still feel my hands shaking a little, but the warmth of the coffee helped calm my nerves. A couple of other truckers were scattered around the place, most of them too focused on their meals or their phones to notice me. I was grateful for that. The last thing I needed was someone asking why I looked like I'd just seen a ghost. As I sat there, the events replayed in my head, and I couldn't help but chuckle. Not because it was funny, but because of the sheer absurdity of it all. Here I was, just trying to get through another night on the road, and instead, I almost ended up in the middle of some backwoods horror show. But that's the thing about being a trucker, no matter how many miles you've got under your belt, the road always has a way of keeping you on your toes. And sometimes, it throws you a curveball just to see if you're still paying attention. By the time I finished my coffee, the adrenaline had worn off, leaving me feeling more tired than ever. I headed back out to the truck, climbed into the sleeper, and stretched out on the bed. As I lay there, staring up at the ceiling, I couldn't help but think about how close I'd come to being another statistic, another trucker who got in over his head. But not tonight. Tonight, I'd made it out in one piece. And with any luck, tomorrow would be just another day on the road, no surprises, no close calls, just me and Betsy, rolling down the highway, leaving the ghosts of this night far behind. And as I drifted off to sleep, I couldn't help but smile, because I knew that no matter what the road threw at me next, I'd be ready for it. I'd been on the road for what felt like an eternity, pushing through the Midwest on one of those long-haul overnight shifts that makes you question every life choice you've ever made. My eyes were heavy, the kind of heavy where it feels like they've got weights tied to them, and my mind was a foggy mess from lack of sleep. I kept blinking hard, slapping my face, anything to stay awake. The highway was a long, dark ribbon stretching endlessly before me, only the occasional flicker of a lonely farmhouse light breaking up the darkness. Somewhere in the distance, I saw a sign for a rest area. Finally, I muttered to myself, relief washing over me. I needed a quick nap before I did something stupid like fall asleep at the wheel and end up in a ditch. Or worse. As I pulled off at the Litchfield rest area, just past mile marker 58 on I-55 in Illinois, the place was as deserted as you'd expect at 2:30 in the morning. Not a single car in sight, and the building itself looked like it hadn't seen a lick of maintenance since the 80s. The kind of place you imagine some washed-up, chain-smoking horror writer coming to for inspiration. But beggars can't be choosers. I parked my rig, locked the doors out of habit, and reclined my seat. The truck's gentle hum was almost comforting, like a lullaby. I closed my eyes, letting the exhaustion take over. I figured I'd catch 20 minutes and be back on the road, fresh as a daisy. Fat chance. No sooner had I dozed off than a sharp knock on the window jolted me awake. My heart nearly leapt out of my chest as I shot upright, scanning the darkness. I blinked a few times, trying to shake the grogginess. When my eyes finally focused, I saw her, a young woman, standing right outside the truck, her face pale and terrified, her breath fogging up the glass. "Where the hell did you come from?" I mumbled to myself, rolling down the window just a crack. My brain was still playing catch-up, trying to process how someone could sneak up on me like that without me noticing. "What do you need?" I asked, more wary than concerned. You don't survive as a female trucker without developing a healthy sense of caution, and something about this woman set my instincts on high alert. She didn't answer right away, just mouthed something over and over, too quiet for me to hear. I leaned closer. Her voice was faint, barely a whisper, like she'd screamed herself hoarse. "Help me, please, he's coming." I didn't know what to say, but before I could react, she just vanished. 1 second she was there, and the next, gone, like a puff of smoke. I whipped my head around, scanning the area outside the truck, but there was no sign of her. No movement. Nothing. Just the endless black of night and the soft rustle of leaves in the breeze. A chill crawled up my spine, settling in the pit of my stomach. Every horror story I'd ever heard about these empty highways came flooding back. I'd been in some strange situations before, but this was something else. Something wrong. "Hell no," I muttered, my voice shaky. I was getting the hell out of there, and I didn't care if I had to drive all the way to the next state to find a safer place to sleep. But when I turned the key, the engine didn't start. It just made that horrible clicking noise, the one that says, "I'm dead, lady, and so are you." The lights flickered, and then the CB radio crackled to life, static hissing through the cab. My heart skipped a beat as I leaned closer to the speaker, and that's when I heard it again, faint but unmistakable. "Help me." My blood ran cold. It was the same voice, the same desperate plea, but this time it was coming from the radio. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it, but there was no logic here. No explanation that didn't terrify me to my core. I glanced in the rearview mirror out of instinct, and that's when I saw him. A figure, hulking and misshapen, emerging from the trees at the edge of the rest area. He moved with an unnatural speed, covering the distance between us in what felt like seconds. He was too tall, too broad, and his face was hidden in shadow, but there was no mistaking the intent in his movements. He was coming for me. Panic surged, and I twisted the key again, practically begging the damn truck to start. The engine roared to life, the dashboard lights flaring back on, and I didn't waste a second. I floored it out of there, tires screeching on the asphalt, my heart pounding in my chest like a jackhammer. As I tore down the exit ramp, I glanced in the side mirror, hoping, praying, that I'd lost him. But he was there, standing in the middle of the road, just staring after me with those glowing eyes. Not like headlights, not like any animal I'd ever seen, no, these were something out of a nightmare, bright and malevolent, burning into my soul. But that wasn't the worst part. As I glanced in the rearview mirror again, I caught a glimpse of something that made my blood freeze. The young woman was in the back of my cab, sitting on the edge of the sleeper, her eyes wide with terror, as if she was about to scream. I swerved, nearly losing control of the rig. When I looked back, she was gone. Vanished, just like she had at the window. By the time I hit the next town, I was shaking so badly I could barely keep the truck on the road. I pulled into a diner parking lot, threw the rig in park, and just sat there, trying to steady my breathing, trying to convince myself that I hadn't lost my damn mind. The diner was open, a 24-hour joint where truckers like me went to caffeinate and complain. I staggered inside, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, and slumped into a booth. The waitress, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes, came over with a coffee pot in hand. "Rough night?" she asked, pouring me a cup. "You have no idea," I muttered, wrapping my hands around the warm mug like it was a lifeline. She gave me a sympathetic look, then nodded toward the two old-timers at the counter, who were deep in conversation. "Sounds like you're not the only one." I listened, trying to drown out the thumping in my ears, and caught bits and pieces of their conversation. They were talking about a rest area up the highway, the one I'd just come from. "Place has been abandoned for years," one of them said, shaking his head. "Ever since those folks went missing. Never did find them." The other nodded solemnly. "Damn shame. Some say it's cursed. You ask me, ain't nothing good ever come out of that place." I swallowed hard, feeling the coffee turn to lead in my stomach. I'd been to that place, hell, I'd barely escaped it. I knew then, with a bone-deep certainty, that what I'd seen wasn't some trick of my exhausted mind. That woman, whatever she was, whoever she was, had been real. And that hulking figure, he was real too. The rest of the night passed in a blur. I kept to the main roads, avoiding every rest area, every dark turnoff, like the plague. By the time I reached my destination, I was running on nothing but fear and caffeine, but I didn't care. I was alive, and that was more than I could say for whatever poor souls had crossed paths with that place before me. Now, every time I pass a rest area on the highway, I get this creeping feeling at the back of my neck, like someone's watching, waiting. And I can't help but wonder if that woman's still out there, trapped in that nightmare, waiting for someone else to stop. One thing's for sure, I won't be stopping to find out. Thank you so much for watching and supporting my channel. Your time and engagement mean the world to me. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more content. And be sure to hit that notification bell so you never miss an update. Your support keeps this channel going, and I truly appreciate each and every one of you. Thank you.